And when you understand what you just heard, those who've been tuned in to MBPP Radio heard the broadcast of the doctors commenting on the coronavirus. But what I'm going to do this evening for the family, once again, welcome to Alkebulan News with your combat reporter, Brother Thutmose Sankara. And this evening, what we'll do is we're going to recount this medical apartheid history of the United States and just take a look at it. We're not going to argue or debate back and forth about the validity of whatever decision one decides to make in regards to their personal health. But what we'll do is we'll just look at the history of exploitation medically in the African community across the world, right? And so what we'll do is we'll look at it from a broad-based perspective, and we'll go to the continent to begin. And not very long ago, the Pfizer drug, Trovan, many of you may have heard of it. It's the lawsuit, the famous lawsuit, Abdullahi versus Pfizer Incorporated, is the precedented legal case for you legal eagles out there who like to study this type of stuff. Abdullahi versus Pfizer Incorporated. But the Pfizer drug Trovan was used in a clinical trial in Kano, Nigeria. The trial compared the new antibiotic Trovan against the best treatment available at the time, which was intravenous ceftriaxone. 11 children died in the trial. 5 after taking Trovan and 6 after taking an older antibiotic used for comparison in the clinical trial. So both of them were poisonous. Others suffered blindness, deafness, and brain damage, the cause of which is difficult to determine because these disabilities are relatively common outcomes of the disease itself. A panel of medical experts later implicated Pfizer in the incident, concluding the drug had been administered as part of an illegal clinical trial without authorization from the Nigerian government or consent from the children's parents. This led to a lawsuit from the Nigerian government over informed consent. Pfizer countered that it met all the necessary regulations. The drug was approved for general use in the U.S., but eventually withdrawn due to hepatotoxicity. HEPA of the blood, poisonous to the blood, right? So this case of the Nigerian government, Abdullahi versus Pfizer, is one to study for those who may be listening on the continent or may have people that may have been affected by these trials of this drug in the 90s. It wasn't that long ago in Kano, Nigeria. Also in our revolutionary Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, as I know from prior study, was one of the centers where the AIDS virus was focused to be able to be proliferated across the continent. Of course, if you want to kill some Africans and you don't want nobody around to try to fight imperialism, then Zimbabwe is probably the place you want to go, And so in the 90s also, the HIV AIDS, of course, we remember the use of AZT, which was deadly in itself. And so the trials of this particular drug took place in Zimbabwe, conducted on HIV positive African subjects by U.S. physicians. And the University of Zimbabwe were performed without prior informed consent. The United States began testing AZT treatments in Africa in 1994 through projects funded by the Centers for Disease Control. the WHO, World Health Organization, and the National Institutes of Health. Got devils coming every which way. American, European, every which way, right? It included in testing of over 17,000 women for a medication that prevents mother-to-child transmission of HIV/AIDS, trying to stop the children from having it, right? You can hear the story. The subjects did not fully understand the testing methods, the effectiveness, the possible dangers, or the nature of a placebo in testing situations. They were also told about the trials under duress. Half of these women received a placebo that has no effect, making transmission likely. As a result, an estimated 1,000 babies contracted HIV/AIDS, although a proven life-saving regimen already existed. The CDC ended the short course testing in 98 after they announced they had enough information from Thailand trials. You often hear that when you get caught in Africa, then they'll try to move it over there to the Asians, to the brown skin. Can't get black skin, go for the dark skin. Forced sexual reassignment in South Africa, and I remember this. This was very. It was a thing that got a lot of reporting prior, and that I had heard about before, and by studying the Truth and Reconciliation hearings of South Africa. But forced sexual reassignment in South Africa in the 70s and 80s, in a project headed by Aubrey Levin, Aubrey Levin, during the 70s to 80s, the South African Defense Force forced lesbian and gay military personnel to undergo sex change operations. This was part of a secret program to purge homosexuality in the army. It included psychological coercion, chemical castration, electrical shock, and other unethical medical experiments. An estimated 900 forced sexual reassignment operations may have been performed between 1971 and 89 at military hospitals. Most of the victims were males, young 16 to 24-year-old white 16 to 24 who were drafted into the army during the South African border war. Women were also subjected to the experimentation. So that's very important when you look at the history of the United States. Said don't ask, don't tell, right? They did what? South Africa, these crackers, they say, hey, all right, well, we're gonna, oh, you want to be a woman? All right, we're gonna make you a woman. And change through surgery those people's sexual assignments. Wow. Forced contraception in Zimbabwe also. So if you can't get Zimbabwe with the AIDS, you come back with the sterilization, right? You can't get them with Robert Gallo, you come back with Margaret Sanger. Right? Depo-provera. I know the word is familiar. We've all heard it, you know, probably if you above 40 or whatever. Depo-provera was clinically tested on Black Rhodesian Zimbabwean women in the 70s. Once approved, the drug was used as a birth control measure. Women on white-run commercial farms were coerced into accepting Depo-provera. Not only on white farms in Rhodesia, but African sisters in Chicago and New York and Atlanta and Memphis and New Orleans too, right? But the clinical trials took place in Zimbabwe. In 81, the drug was banned in what was then Zimbabwe, but they were still using it here. Going on around the continent, down there, we still down Southern Africa, right? You got to talk about the Germans when you talk about medical experimentation and all of that, right? You got to talk about Hitler and them. But before his time even, he just inherited that murderous heritage. And in Namibia, course, many know of the full experimentation on the people of Namibia. And if you study that region well, you know of the full extermination of African peoples, African tribes, nations there, particularly the sand people, the desert dwellers. Complete elimination. That's the Germans, right? But if the ones they didn't want to kill physically, they made sure through experimentation and medical apartheid that there would be no regeneration of that population. Eugene Eugene, just take the E off at the end, Fisher, conducted sterilization experiments on Herero women in German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, of course, in the early 1900s. His experimentation was largely done on mixed-race offspring in order to provide justification to ban mixed-race marriages. He joined the Nazi Party thereafter, where he did similar experiments in the Jewish concentration camps. Got his practice in Africa, right? Late stage studies were later continued by Dr. Hans Harmsen, Harmsen, founder of the German branch of the International Planned Parenthood Federation, which is also associated with the compulsory sterilization in Nazi Germany. Do you see this link? First to the continent, to the large population of African people, then to you, right here in Turtle Island, right? Hey, study the large population. You know how they do it with the lab rats. You get the general population of them, right? Do a large experiment. Then you get a focus group. And then you get to pick between the populations and then get into the biological experimentation to understand the melanin and the degree of African biological superiority to try to find each and every method to break that down. That is the goal of the white supremacists. And so we see these experiments. We're looking at Namibia now. We see Zimbabwe. We see South Africa. We see Nigeria, right? These were the biggest programs. Nigeria, you got to get Nigeria because they're the biggest population of Africans on the continent, right? But after you get through out of West Africa, then you start concentrating down Southern Africa. You got to ask yourself why, don't you? Have to ask yourself why. Is it a coincidence that the most liberation on the continent has been delivered from Southern Africa, Angola, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Tanzania, right? Is it a coincidence that the focus of the medical experimentation internationally on the continent of Africa recently, Germany with Namibia was early 1900s. And we know there are more. We talk about coming up to Bill Gates and all this. We talk about massive, talking about international campaigns, nose inoculation campaigns, smallpox, right? But looking at the numbers and the degree, like we're saying about in South Africa, just took 1,000 folks and just did, and then look at the transfer of the technology in this medical apartheid, medical biological experimentation regime from South Africa to the United States. That's how important it is as Africans in the United States to what it is that we're dealing with, because like I'm saying, they use the larger population of Africans on the continent for these experiments, and then they bring it to you. They stopped giving out Depo-Provera in Zimbabwe, and they were still doing it here in the United States. So look at the plan of white supremacy medically, biologically, in regards to the genocide against African people that is occurring, in the degree that these things are practiced specifically to break down the immune system and to experiment on degrees of breaking down the immune system prior to what it is that we're dealing with now. You know, the code word stuff. We don't even say what it is, right? Because we're just concentrating on the history. But I want to throw a name out to you. Actually, if you ever heard it before. Henrietta Lacks. You know who? You ever heard that name before? Henrietta Lacks. A beautiful sister. That picture they have of her, that one picture that they always publicize. There are more. I've seen others. But Henrietta Lacks, born August 1st, 1920, expired October 4th, 1951, was a sister whose cancer cells are the source of the HeLa cell line, capital H-E, capital L-A. The first immortalized human cell line and one of the most important cell lines in medical research. An immortalized cell line reproduces indefinitely under specific conditions. And the HeLa cell line continues to be a source of invaluable medical data to the present day. Queen Sister was the unwitting victim of cell, not only organ trafficking, but cell trafficking. The very essence of this woman was capitalized upon by the medical science community and proliferated across the world, where even until today, all cancer research is based upon these HeLa cells of Henrietta Lacks. You get it? Henrietta, H-E, Lacks, L-A. It's a Frankensteinian experience to be an African anywhere in the world under the right conditions, under the government programs of medical experimentation for profit for ultimately the pharmaceutical companies. They're the ones who triumph upon this. But back to Mama Henrietta. In 1951 in Baltimore, Maryland, at the diabolical Johns Hopkins Hospital, Mama Henrietta was the unwitting source of the cells from a tumor biopsy during treatment for cervical cancer, as was then the practice. No consent was required to culture the cells obtained from Lacks' treatment. Consistent with contemporary standards, neither she nor her family were compensated for their extraction or use. Even though some information about the origin of HeLa's immortalized cell lines was known to researchers after 1970, the Lacks family was not made aware of the line's existence until 1975. With knowledge of the cell line's genetic provenance becoming public, its use for medical research and for commercial purposes continues to raise concerns about privacy and patients' rights. So you're looking at Mama Henrietta, and she is immortal, and her life and her history has been used as the basis for medical experimentation for disease. They're using that woman's cells, and they know how to cure it, but they still won't do it because, of course, that means that You can't make any more money off of cancer because now they just take a pill, do a treatment, and it's gone. And so understand the degree through Mama Henrietta. But I want to go on about her because I want you to know her. Henrietta Lack. Actually, right, she was born Loretta Pleasant. You know, back in the day, how we do. But Mama Lack was born Loretta Pleasant on August 1st, 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia, to Eliza Pleasant and Johnny Randall Pleasant. She is remembered as having hazel eyes, a small waist, size 6 shoes, and always wearing red nail polish and a neatly pleated skirt. Her family is uncertain how her name changed from Loretta to Henrietta, but she was nicknamed Henny. When Lax was 4 years old in 1924, her mother died giving birth to her 10th child. Unable to care for the children alone after his wife's death, Lax's father moved the family to Clover, Virginia, where the children were distributed among relatives. Lax ended up with her maternal grandmother, Tommy Henry Lax, in a 2-story log cabin that was once the slave quarters on the plantation that had been owned by Henrietta's white great-grandfather and great-uncle. She shared a room with a 9-year-old first cousin and future husband, David Day Lax. Right? Y'all know how they do back in the day. Like most members of her family in Clover, Lax worked as a tobacco farmer starting from an early age. She fed the animals, tended the garden, and toiled in the tobacco fields. She attended the designated black school 2 miles away from the cabin until she had to drop out to help support the family in the 6th grade. Read the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lax. And that is because I'm listening to the details and I'm remembering from reading the book. Awesome book. In 1935, when Lax was 14 years old, she gave birth to a son, Lawrence Lax. In 1939, her daughter, Elsie Lax, was born. Both children were fathered by Day Lax. Elsie had epilepsy and cerebral palsy and was described by the family as different or deaf and dumb. On April 10, 1941, David Day Lax and Henrietta Lax were married in Halifax, Virginia. Later that year, their cousin, Fred Garrett, convinced the couple to leave the tobacco farm in Virginia and move to Turner Station near Dundalk, Maryland, in Baltimore County. And so, with that move, now, they moved down here into this area. So that's how they get down here toward Johns Hopkins. So let me get to the diagnosis and treatment. On January 29, 1951, Lax went to Johns Hopkins, the only hospital in the area that treated black patients, because she felt a knot in her womb. She had previously told her cousin about the knot, and they had assumed correctly that she was pregnant. But after giving birth to Joseph, Lax had a severe hemorrhage. Her primary care doctor tested her for syphilis, which came back negative, and referred her back to Johns Hopkins. There, her doctor, Howard W. Jones, took a biopsy of a mass found on Lax's cervix for laboratory testing. Soon after, Lax was told that she had a malignant epidermoid sarcoma of the cervix. Epidermoid sarcoma of the cervix. In 1970, physicians discovered that she had been misdiagnosed and actually had adenosarcoma. Adeno. Remember those words. When you get into the book, you start to see what the biological and medical mistakes that were made in regards to the diagnosis of Mama Lax. As it says here, this was a common mistake at the time, and the treatment would not have differed. Lax was treated with radium tube inserts. Radiation. Well, remember that. As an inpatient and discharged a few days later with instructions to return for x-ray treatments as a follow-up. During her treatments, 2 samples were taken from Lax's cervix without her permission or knowledge. One sample was of healthy tissue and the other was cancerous. These samples were given to George Otto Gey, Gey, George Otto Gey. Sound German, don't it? A physician and cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins. The cells from the cancerous sample eventually became known as the HeLa immortal cell line, a commonly used cell line in contemporary biomedical research. On August 8, 1951, Lax, who was 31 years old, went to Johns Hopkins for a routine treatment session and asked to be admitted due to continued severe abdominal pain. She received blood transfusions and remained at the hospital until her death on October 4, 1951. A partial autopsy showed that the cancer had metastasized through her entire body. Lax was buried in an unmarked grave in her family cemetery in a place called Laxtown in Halifax County, Virginia. Laxtown is the name that was given to the land in Clover, Virginia that was originally owned by slave-owning members of the Lax family in the antebellum South. Buried in the town in an unmarked grave with a town named after her, and her cells spread all over the world. I tell you, we are living in a nightmare incomparable to any existence in the history of any people ever in the universe. But let's bring it on back home, right? Irradiation experiments here in your good old United States, right? Between 1960 and 1971, the Department of Defense funded non-consensual whole-body radiation experiments on mostly poor and black cancer patients who were not told what was done to them. Patients were told that they were receiving a treatment that might cure their cancer, but the Pentagon was trying to determine the effects of high levels of radiation on their body. One of the doctors involved in the experiments was worried about litigation by the patients. He referred to them only by their initials on the medical report. He did this so that, in his words, there will be no means by which the patients can ever connect themselves up with the report to prevent either adverse publicity or litigation. From 1960 to 1971, Dr. Eugene Sanger. You ever heard this guy's name? Funded by the Defense Atomic Support Agency, performed a whole-body radiation experiments on more than 90 poor black in advanced stage cancer patients with inoperable tumors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. These are called if you want to research these, you can Wikipedia them. They are called the Cincinnati radiation experiments. Thought syphilis was something, huh? He forged consent forms and did not inform, of course, the patients of the risk of this radiation. The patients were given 100 or more rads, 1 GY of whole body radiation. Good God, if you know what that is. Whew. It's a million microwaves. 100 or more rads of whole body radiation, which in many caused intense pain and vomiting. It's like as soon as they hit, just right then. Of course, the rationale, there's no rationale for this. We talk about Frankenstein, right? Talking about old Frank. He ain't just gonna take your organs out and dish them out to whoever got the most money. Trying to figure out how this nuclear stuff works. What if we put a whole African in this nuclear of this? Let's microwave these Africans, right? The 100 rad. Good God. Of course, this history of what it is that we're talking about here, it didn't begin there. Remember Marie Curie? You study nuclear research, radiation research. You go back to these white folks, her and her husband, they killed themselves with radiation. These people don't care. They'll kill themselves to try to. So what they think? You think they think of you, right? From 1963 to 1973, a leading endocrinologist, Dr. Carl Heller, irradiated the testicles of Oregon and Washington prisoners. Carl Heller. Hell of a guy, right? In return for their participation, he gave them $5 a month and $100 when they had to have a vasectomy upon conclusion of the trial. Oh, man, look, they had to cut them off. I give you $100. Pure evil. Carl Heller. Dr. Carl Heller. 1963 to 1973, state of Oregon and Washington. $5 a month to participate in it, and $100 when they got to cut everything off. The surgeon who sterilized the men said it was necessary to keep them from contaminating the men, the general population, with radiation-induced mutants. Don't want to be putting no radiated mutants out there, fried and testicles and experimenting in all kind of ways, right? Dr. Joseph Hamilton, one of the researchers who had worked with Heller on the experiments, said the experiments had a little bit of Buchenwald touch. a little touch of Buchenwald. You know what Buchenwald is? In Germany? It's a touch of Buchenwald. You know, touch of Buchenwald. The Germans was born out of the United States. The United States is Germany's big brother. Germany ain't never had access to the number of Africans that the United States do and all the experiments they did on them. Quit putting that on Hitler now. They're the little brother in this. In 1963, University of Washington researchers irradiated the testicles of 232 prisoners to determine the effects of radiation on testicular function. Let's see if you can work them things, y'all, boy. Y'all got them big things and all. Let's see if you can work them with them, with these nukes in them. This man is devil incarnate. You don't need to ask no questions. Just pure. His actions tell it. If you don't turn your eyes away from the reality. Because, hey, I don't want to hurt nobody. I don't want, Once again, as I often say, if you're not in an organization in the struggle towards liberation of your people, you're against your people. You got to get on the right side of things. Ain't nobody gonna hunt you down. We ain't trying to berate you and all of that, but just know that they're putting radiation to people's whole bodies. Is there any other reason in the world to just go all out against them? When these inmates later left the prison, once again, in 1963, the University of Washington researchers irradiated. University of Washington, they're in a college, getting prisoners and irradiating their testicles. They go names. 232 of them. Just to determine the effects of what the radiation going to do, right? When the inmates left, when they got out of prison and had children, at least 4 of them had offspring born with birth defects. The exact number is you don't know because they didn't follow that up, right? It did what it did. And what they found out. The rest of them, it was whatever. The diabolicalness of capitalism, U.S. imperialism, the race to find how to cure something just to put it out of the market. Copyright it, put it off the market so nobody can use it. And by any means, irradiating people, cutting off their testicles, putting radiation in their brains, shooting syphilis in them, whatever it is you got to do to make money for the pharmacy. Because health and living, as long as you can control that, you can control the whole world. Oh, and I ain't talking about nothing that was going on today about no pandemic or nothing. We're just taking a little walk down Frankenstein history. Jeepers, Reapers, this stuff is crazy. I bet there's some aliens somewhere in outer space that's looking down here like, good God Almighty, them people experiment on these people. They do whatever they want to do. They got the whole world locked down because it's like, my God. And maybe some little young officer is like, well, let me go help them. And the big guy's like, no, don't take your ass down there. Don't you go down there. It's like, why? Because them people ain't going to fight. Look at them. They know what they're doing. Why they letting it happen? I can't risk us. You're more valuable than that. Until the knowledge and the consciousness of what has actually happened to you strikes your spirit, strikes your heart, strikes your soul to the point where you take in the information and it quickens your spirit and your consciousness to the point where the loyalty to yourself is what is most valuable. And go back to our teachings. African holistic health, heal thyself, Nutricide, Dr. Sebi's herbal formulas, all of Dr. Paul Gauss and all of the greats. Go back to ourselves. Go back to what it is that we had learned before we caught this cognitive dissonance behind this worldwide biological experiment that is occurring before us. It's no doubt that it is a biological experiment. I'm not even going to go and recount all of the evidences that there is of it. We ain't even here for that tonight. I'm just trying to run it down to you, right? Let me give you one more. From approximately 1951 to 1974, the Holmesburg prison in Pennsylvania, which some of the comrades been there. I know Sundiata, Russell Maroon had formerly been there before, was the extent of extensive dermatological research operations using prisoners as subjects led by Dr. Albert M. Kligman of the University of Pennsylvania. The studies were performed on behalf of Dow Chemical Company, the U.S. Army, and Johnson & Johnson. Dow Chemical wanted to study the health effects of dioxin and other herbicides to discover how they affect human skin. Because workers at the chemical plants were developing chloracine. In the study, Kligman applied about the same amount of dioxin as that to which the employees were being exposed. In 1980 and 1981, some of the people were used in this study sued Professor Kligman because they were suffering from a variety of health problems, including lupus and psychological damage. Kligman later continued his dioxin studies, increasing the dosage of dioxin, which he applied to the skin of 10 prisoners to 7,500 micrograms of dioxin, which is 468 times the dosage that the Dow Chemical official Gerald K. Rowe had authorized him to administer. As the result, the prisoners developed inflammatory pustules and papules. The Holmesburg program paid hundreds of inmates a nominal stipend to test a wide range of cosmetic products and chemical compounds, whose effects were unknown at the time. Upon his arrival at Holmesburg, Kligman is claimed to have said, "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time." A 1964 issue of Medical News reported that 9 out of 10 prisoners at Holmesburg Prison were medical test subjects. In 1967, the U.S. Army paid Kligman to apply skin blistering chemicals to the faces and backs of inmates at Holmesburg. In Kligman's words, to learn how the skin protects itself against chronic assault from toxic chemicals, the so-called hardening process. Pure evil. And we ain't even going into no psychological experiments, no MK Ultra, none of that stuff, right? We're talking about the chemical and pharmaceutical and biological experimentation of people for the capitalistic endeavor of acquiring funds to keep any life. The main goal is to keep any life-saving serums, compounds, healing modicums away from the human population so as to control it, to copyright it, put it to the side, and then give you what it is that's going to kill you, to carry out those plans that your good old boy Bill Gates was talking about. They say eliminate what, 90% of the planet? They too greedy. They want too much. You old greedy old Africans out there. You ain't gonna take that little piece of ghetto little cement building I gave you to live in, with building and water and all that. You don't want you keep talking stuff. I tell you what. The devil incarnate. The struggle for the liberation of African people is nigh. Yep, it's right here. It's right in your body. Whether your immune system is able to take the assault of even if you don't take the jab of the environment, you can still fall victim to it. It's like some kind of herbal war. Some environmental herbal war. If you can get through the matrix and find the mystery and get to your natural self, you may survive. If not, yeah, we told you. And next week, me and Queen Sister Crystal Muhammad will be following up this information, and we'll be honing in on exactly what it is that we're going through so that we may begin to get ourselves organized for how we need to be moving and grooving, because now is the time. This has been your combat reporter, Brother Thutmose Sankara, here on Alkebulan News. And remember, as always, African people, stay vigilant. Black power, black power.